Thanks for joining, Carlo. It's good to see you again.
As always, yes.
Good. So I have a lot of questions that I'd like to ask you, but why don't we just start by giving you the floor, giving you an opportunity to tell people what it is that you're doing currently, where you're at, what's going on in your life. I know you are teaching again, and I'm looking forward to visiting your class again. But what else do you have going on?
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is actually I would say, an interesting time. So I'm in the midst of a transition, really occasioned by restructuring. I think all of us have heard about restructuring uh, as just a part of the corporate life cycle, and that really emerged in October for me. So I'm really in a interim phase where I'm really trying to figure out what will be the next chapter for me. So it's, I think, actually a time of excitement to really brainstorm. And I think, I'm a really pretty abundance minded sort of philosophy that I bring to everything. So, but I'm glad for any of the listeners, if you are looking for someone with a lot of energy and engagement to add to your team, think of me, please.
Yeah, this is an interesting time, and maybe it's just I'm more aware of it now, but the change there have been a lot of changes over the last, I'd say, 6 months or more, and I think we're probably going to see more changes moving forward into next year. But yeah. So if anybody's looking for a chief IP counsel, Carlo is available. Uh, and let's talk about that. You've done a lot of writing for us at IP Watchdog over the years, and you've talked about things about, how do you set up a department? How do you properly incentivize the people who are working for you, and not just the lawyers, but the inventors, and how do you make sure everything is streamlined, and how do you use tools properly, and all this sort of thing. That to me suggests that you put in a tremendous amount of thought in this, and it's not something that you probably walked into the job the first day as chief IP counsel necessarily understanding and appreciating. But what do you think? So my question then is, what do you think is the most important part of being a chief IP counsel now that you've done it for 5 or 6 years? Looking back on that time, and I guess maybe what I'll also will ask you to reflect on is did you have a sense of these things being the important part when you first took the job?
Yeah,
So
that's
there's a
right.
lot on the table.
Y-
So
Yeah.
so approach it from however you want to get us going, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. Well, I think just kind of overall, let me maybe set the table, or even before the table is set up. I think in the growth of IP departments, I think sometimes what inevitably happens, or legal departments, what inevitably happens is obviously they're in a smaller state. I mean, things organically grow. There may be spurts of growth, but I think sometimes what happens is the growth overtakes the thoughtfulness of how is the department, should it be optimally set up. So you find sometimes where the idea is, okay, oh, we have some more work, so let's promote someone to be a quote unquote leader or manager who hasn't done that before, and then gradually just headcount is added to address needs of the business. But my experience with that is sometimes what that leads to is just a department that does a lot of great work, but they just get really focused on the tactical firefighting. So I would say, really, in a larger sense, taking a very holistic view and a curated view of the IP or legal function, and really looking at the strategy, the people, the operations. And I think tactics always, that's what I really learned over the last number of years. Tactics always get center stage. And then all these fundamentals that really can mean the difference between good and great or amazing, those are really just almost an afterthought sometimes. And the system is allowed to perpetuate and just do work. Again, it can be often very highly impactful work, but it's not going to be necessarily optimal. It's not going to find sort of the diamond in the rough. It's not going to really make sure that people are thoroughly flourishing to really have their power unleashed. So I would say, yeah, that's been a big learning. The holistic nature you need to bring to bear, but also just the recognition that organizations, large and small, I mean, they're sort of sociological groups. They are societies. I mean, they're just change is hard. I mean, that's really a given. And trying to, when you have hopefully some bold and potentially transformational ideas, you really need to always be so attentive and considerate of the difficulties of change. And that is just, I think, something that any leader needs to be really acutely aware of. Yet through collaboration, and that's, I love to collaborate. When you've got great people with good intentions working together, you can surmount those, but it takes time and it takes a lot of sensitivity.
Yeah. So I think you've called it at times like, purposeful leadership, or is that the
Yeah,
right term?
intentionality. Sure, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. So how do you, so what kind of, tactics or strategies, or, and I don't want to, that's probably not the right way to say it, because it's not like you're trying to, uh, brainwash people into being better team players and better for the company, but what type of tactics or strategies did you find that were most helpful in order to make sure everybody was really on the same page and rowing in the same direction?
That's a great question. I think first of all, when one comes into to a new setting, you really need to have that listening mode. I mean, I've heard about people who've gone into settings where they profess to have the answers, and I think you've got to go into a setting with humility and sort of listening. But you really need, again, this ability to move up, I think, higher levels of abstraction, big picture, into really sense. And not, I don't think everyone is wired for this. I think we all have our own sort of areas of expertise and where we really shine. But I don't think everyone, especially amazing subject matter experts in the IP and legal field, think some of them are just many of them, I think, just again are those experts and that can get results, but I don't think they have the time, and sometimes they're not as interested in really taking that higher level view of things. So I think you've got to hopefully be in a place where you can issue spot and sense that something is not being attended to, or there could be a brighter future that could involve monetization, could involve streamlined work, could involve building stronger portfolios. And then at that point, when you have the ideas, you don't just start legislating them. Absolutely not. Then you start working through the team and saying, well, here are some potential ideas. What are your thoughts? But that's, I believe sometimes you have one-on-one conversations, sometimes before the group conversations, but over time you gain a recognition, because in a team of any size, you will have different personality profiles and mindsets. I don't know if you've heard of the DISC personality assessments that have become very prevalent, that really sort of help people understand themselves and each other. I mean,
Hmm.
there was, of course, Myers-Briggs, other things in the past, but DISC has been, I think, really embraced in recent years. So you find out who is who, and those defaults, that wiring, that inclination really makes a difference. And then you get to know who are the people who you can sort of sit down with, and then immediately they're like, that's a great idea, let's build on that. And the others who you need to kind of take time with them and understand that they bring amazing expertise, but their perspectives will differ. And so it has to be, I think, a stepwise process, and you have to recognize it will take time and so forth to figure out how to make change happen. And you have to do a lot of prioritizing, because in any setting you have such limited resources. You want to make sure that what you are working on, you can objectively say this is going to make a difference. You don't want to have a potential initiative and where people are like, why is this helpful? Why is it? And sometimes people need convincing, but you need to have like your own self-filtering perspective where you can kind of say, wait a second, no, I don't think this sounds really notionally good, but really what will it move in terms of how much of the needle?
Hmm. Yeah. there's a lot there for us to unpack. One of the things that have always marveled about, and the older I get, the more I marvel at it, is in the law firm situation. Wind up spending your whole career. You go to law school to learn how to learn the law. You don't learn how to be a lawyer in law school. Then you become an associate and you learn how to be a lawyer, and then you start being good at it. And then the firm decides, oh, this is the type of person that we would probably want to have around on a long-term basis. So then they make you a junior partner, and then you're a partner. And it's not until you get to be a partner, in some firms, a senior partner, not even a junior partner, but you're a more senior partner, that now all of a sudden you have some responsibility with respect to managing the business, or managing a part of the business, or committees that are essential for the business to actually succeed. And you've never been, most people, lawyers, certainly not patent lawyers, have ever been trained to run a business, or to know what to look for. And so you get, I think, a lot of fish out of water. And I think that describes a lot of times when you see firms that have been very good, and then all of a sudden one day they're just gone. And I don't think that it's always this case, but I do think a lot of times they didn't grow up and have the to have the people learn how to run the business, and then all of a sudden the people who started the firm, and they're gone. And it strikes me that this is even more of a problem for in-house folks, because there is a lot of high turnover in-house. It seems to me, at least. I mean, you get some people are lucky enough to spend their whole career at a particular place, but you see a whole lot of turnover, and then you see all kinds of different models in the Chief Patent Counsel office or the Chief IP Counsel office. Some of them like to do the work. They don't like to do the strategy. Some of them like to do the strategy, and they don't like to do the work. And it's just, there's so much that goes into doing it well, it seems. And I'll stop there and just get your reaction to any of what I've just said.
No, that's really great, Gene. I think maybe I can tell a little story again about the DISC profile, because done team DISC assessments in the past. And what was interesting in one past situation was when you looked across the team, and let's say maybe in this case, maybe 20 to 25 respondents, and look at those quadrants of the DISC profile, there was a huge, overwhelming concentration in sort of the analytical, introverted sort of side, which again, I mean, amazing expertise there. And then you just had a few outliers, myself included, of sort of some different qualities, which I think you'd really need and want in a team. And I think the lesson for something like that is, in some businesses, some teams, they don't have really sort of that diversity of personality, because you need to have complementary, the people who are sort of maybe their wiring is to think strategy, think bigger, the ones who really love working with their people, nurturing, helping the individuals of all DISC profile categories flourish. And when you don't have that, I think you sort of have sort of an outsized concentration on things, again, that think great things done, but you miss a lot. And then that sustainability you sort of mentioned in terms of attrition. I mean, how do you keep teams together over the long haul when you don't have like paths for the individuals to continue to grow, to have their careers evolve? Because in my view, I mean, people deserve and need to have evolving responsibilities over time. They get tired with quote unquote grinding. Many do. So if you ask someone who has decades of experience to basically function as a first year associate or a early stage corporate attorney, to me, that's a recipe, because we're just not built that way. And you want to keep people really engaged. And so that intentionality, again, you've got to design pathways for your people, and you can't, in my view, just sort of take this approach again. Oh, let's just, we have a head count need. Let's just hire the same person for all seasons. You have to really, and this takes a lot of time and focus to really get this right, because you have all these different individuals that have different personalities, different things that where they shine, and you can't just take this view that if they don't fit into the box, then send them away. I just think that's really misplaced, because there's just a lot of talent and big picture, tactical, granular work. There is a huge spectrum of there. There are a lot of areas that companies want to be focused on, like analytics or monetization, training of their workforce, special partnering with the internal clients, and those are areas where you can tap in, you can evolve roles of your team, but it just doesn't happen. Otherwise, then you get sort of atrophy, and people who have the luxury of moving on, they say, "Look, I really want to grow, and I'm not growing." So again, I think that multifaceted view is something that I really believe is critical if you really want a long, sort of sustainable, high functioning team from all perspectives.
Yeah. Let me ask you along this line, and the relevance of this may not seem immediately important, but I've started talking to, folks like you, who have a lot of experience running internal legal departments at least in the IP space. And seem to be two models. I think one is far more common than the other, but there is the model where the in-house folks do a lot of the work, where and it can go all the way up to, like in the Canon USA situation, Simon Kalmanoff, he essentially is head of a internal law firm that's captive that represents Canon, and they have some outside counsel do some things here and there, but so there's that model on the one end, and then on the other end, there's a very small, very sleek in-house department that then really leverages for everything or almost everything the outside counsel. And then there's different philosophies about, well, do I just give the outside counsel assignments, or do I really treat them as a part of our team and let them know why we're doing things and really try and get their buy-in and their best advice, not just, I want a patent on X, give me a patent on X. And there's all different shades of these things, but listening to what you were just saying about giving people the opportunity to grow, it and how important that is, it seems like that maybe having a very small in-house department is the wrong approach, because there's just no place for people to grow. And I don't know that this wrong approach is the right way to say it. But it comes with different hurdles and pitfalls. So what do you say about in your mind, the right way to structure this so that you're leveraging the expertise of the right outside people, but that you have enough of the work yourself to empower your own people to take ownership and tend to grow? Because if you only have 2 or 3 spots on your legal team, somebody gets a few years in and they've already hit a ceiling unless you're going to leave, you know?
Yeah, I think again, every business is different. So, and I
Hmm.
know I've been in different models that sort of, or I've been in companies where there have been sort of pockets, if you will, that I think had sort of mini armies doing work, doing things. But I would actually approach this, Gene, from the perspective of, is your in-house team doing something that devolves into basically commoditized work, commodity work? That to
Hmm.
me is the really the litmus test, because in my view, you want your in-house people to be really partnering with the business, understanding the business. And if they're spending a huge part of their time on work that really is work that could be efficiently or effectively handled in some other way, then you're not tapping into their full talents. And over time, if you are staying clear of really quote unquote commodity work, or at least minimizing that, then naturally in a dynamic business, I mean, there will be opportunities, and part of growth can come from doing new projects, partnering in new ways with an evolving business. So if you're somewhere where the work remains the same time after time, to me that's an indicia that something is off. But I'm not sure kind of proverbial size and largeness or whatever a group, I wouldn't say that's necessarily determinate, but I think you've got to look at how you're deploying the people and the resources. But I've seen, again, in the past, in a number of years ago, where there was this sort of desire, oh, let's do the prosecution internally because the teams will supposedly understand the technology and everything. But in that particular situation, the attorneys were doing just sort of almost one-off invention, sort of development, prep and pros. So there was a commodity element, and over time, then that team really, maybe on some high-level bullet points, people were told, oh, they're closer to the business, but they really weren't, because it was became this really massive operation that wasn't doing sort of high-level strategic partnering. And so I think you just need to be really, again, that self-filtering before you get into this. Um, you will do yourself a service. And I think it's always, I think you hear the term kingdom building. That's something that goes around, and I think you always have to be really, if you're honest with yourself and really trying to maximize value for your company, you need to have that in your mind. But by the same token, it may require teams of some size and stature to get the job done, to be able to provide innovative, transformational services to the enterprise in different ways. So I have seen in the past as well some people who are afraid to actually ask for resources, because for some reason they think that they're going to be maybe a target of cost cutting, or they think that a really extremely lean group is going to carry the day. I just think, again, you have to look at context. You have to do what's right for the business, and sometimes what's right for the business is advocating for your team, for ultimately the company, and say to really do these things that are not being done, to do this at this world-class level. This is what we recommend. Of course, then the business leaders, they decide how with scarce resources, limited resources, what they want. But you have to really think, again, taking that step, that 10,000 foot view, and really say, what could we do? Where is the potential value? And then continue that feedback loop, self-assessing, getting feedback from your team, from internal clients, and then pivoting. I mean, you may put together growth plans for the next few years that it doesn't make sense. Some of the grand plans, you realize we don't need this. Imperatives of change. So but you can't take the set and forget approach. And that's what I have sort of heard about, have seen in the past sometimes, where it's just the teams grow gradually and then they create hierarchy, structure. Sometimes because, oh, we have senior people, let's give them a senior position. Let's put some people under their tutelage as direct reports, but those same direct reports are doing like the same work as the quote unquote manager. So that, to me, that is artificial, and you need to be really looking at what are people doing, what's the value, but always looking at the people talent and really nurturing that talent. That's where I think I really have a special sort of perspective, that I'm constantly looking at the people, watching them. My dad was a psychologist for an administrator, but for his career of like 38 years. So I grew up from an early age, and you'd be surprised. You learn things. You get sort of this people perspective, this emotional intelligence. I'm not perfect, but I grew up with sort of looking at people in situations, complexities, in different ways. I think it really helped as you grow in your career, and especially when you have manager leader roles, because things happen and you will be surprised often what comes around the corner. You have to then confidently and carefully navigate that and work with people that way. So I think that's a huge part of the legal IP field that I work in. I mean, that intentionality.
So did it surprise you as to how much time you would spend on, for lack of a better way to characterize it, like HR type matters? Like people are having a bad day because their dog died, or they just had a relationship breakup, or their kid is sick and they need some time off to take them to the doctor and that sort. Did it surprise you that that people part was going to be as much a part of your day to day as it wound up being?
Maybe yes and no. I think something I learned from a wonderful HR partner that I had worked with in the past, with a lot of wisdom, and this person sort of said people will show you who they are, and so what that means sometimes is, I mean, you will see the most amazing facets of a person, but sometimes you'll be surprised with some scenario that unfolds, and I think again that's where you just have to recognize 99% of the time you've got really well-meaning professionals are doing their best, but sometimes things happen, and this, just because it's business doesn't mean there is not drama. So, but that's a right. So then
Yeah.
again, it comes down to really being able to collaboratively figure things out, and often it is helping the person who might be acting out of insecurities, or just maybe they didn't have, like you were saying earlier, like in law firms, maybe you didn't have the training of how to be an effective delegator of work or to help people grow. So then but you have to really invest time in this. You've got to coach, you've got to curate. And if you don't do that, then the same patterns will be perpetuated over time. People will sort of get into trouble again because they didn't sort of have someone or some team that sort of said, "Oh, do you see kind of your acting out these patterns? Let's kind of talk about it from a different way." So there is, I would say, a counseling side to this, a partnering that is actually really fulfilling, because when you see these people grow and understand and change, pivot, then that really allows them and the company, the firm, to tap into their full substantive expertise, because is not sort of baggage that's weighing them down or inhibiting how they team up with their colleagues, with internal clients, with external service providers. It really is remarkable because it's a rootedness that you can help your team members achieve. And I think that rootedness, that confidence and emotional intelligence, when you get that right, then I think everyone is going to flourish, and the business will see that. The internal clients will love that, because people show up to every interaction as what I call servant leaders, people who really just have that passion to really serve and create results.
So let me ask you about strategies for actually pulling that off. Because what I have going on in my head is, at times in business, I always try and take at least some part of every year to kind of take a step back and take a look at what we're doing, and not only what I'm doing, but what the company's doing, what we're going to be trying to do for the next year. And also to take a look at what people that are in the company are doing, and to see, because sometimes I think you don't really realize a lot of times just how much time you spend doing things that could either be streamlined or wind up just not being all that particularly necessary. Now, what is your advice for when people are going through this process? One, how often do you think you should go through this process? And two, how do you deal with the situation where, as you're going through this process, sometimes people may get a little defensive, thinking that you're saying, "Oh, you're not doing your job well," or you know, because so often in the world today is everybody is critical and criticizing. And it's not, from my perspective, trying to criticize or be critical. It's, do we really need to spend time doing X? Or should we just say, we're not going to do X anymore, so you can spend more time doing Y? And, but that comes sometimes with some baggage, some difficulty in the interpersonal relationship. So what strategies have you developed to deal with that sort of thing?
Yeah, great questions as always, Gene. I would say in terms of the cadence, I mean, again, I think part of it depends. In recent memory, have you taken a look at all critical facets of your operation? So if you haven't done that, then I think you really need to do sort of a virtual summit with yourself and with others to really take a step back and really look for some low-hanging fruit and other maybe more daunting aspects that you need to look at. So that's sort of I would say a once in a relatively long period sort of look. Then I think it comes down to certainly annually, you want to really be setting priorities. You need to be obviously very tied to executive business leadership. So there can be times throughout a year where something changes or some new initiative, there's some M&A activity that may then warrant a special look to then do some other planning. There'll be special projects. I mean, the life of an in-house practitioner, as I think you're very well aware of, Gene, it's just highly dynamic and it's business driven. It's just
Mhm.
you do what the business needs, and that's you've got. But you have to find time beyond that firefighting piece to really do right by the business. So I think you need cadences. You need again intentionality versus just having something come up and say, "Oh, let's fix this." But I think if you've got a combination with structure to looking at the strategy, evaluating it, evaluating feedback, plus the ad hoc things that come up, then I think you'll be in good shape. But you have to be looking those fundamentals, strategy, people, operations, and looking at the different opportunities, threats in those areas to guide you. And you've got to break it up. You've got to take time. This is thought time to do strategy. It takes a lot of time. I mean, in a different way than the hands-on work. But then getting the ideas and the plans, that's only the start. Then how do you possibly execute this? That takes often something I really learned in recent years is project management. That's something that legal professionals, very few of them learned. So how do you actually have discipline amidst people's busy schedules to get things done, see things through to actual outcomes? So I think it's a combination of factors. Then kind of thinking about sort of implementation of change, and when you talked about defensive, potentially defensive reactions, that's where I think this starts from day one in relationship building. You have to build trust. You need to show who you are, that you're not this unilateral leader who's just going to come in and have the answers. You need to have that humility and to understand, because you're not in the shoes of the people who have had their status quo or their reality. So understanding them, but through engagements and in things that are hopefully maybe less concerning or less change oriented with them, then once you build that trust, then I think it becomes much more attainable to say, look, we're looking at this. I have this idea. What do you think about it? Are you can you at least be open to trying this? And what I found is, again, the vast majority of the time, people will come along with you. I mean, there will be people at different there may be some runners, marathon runners or half marathon runners, like one of my former colleagues. There may be as an actual runner, but he's actually a very marathon runner and very fast. But there may be the slow walkers, the people crawling. But what I find is over time, if you've got a strong team that really believes in the vision that you've been able to help them see, is then you will get through it together. Um, but if you just again are just sort of saying, "Oh, I know best," I mean that's just a recipe for cratering really immediately. So, but it's a really
Yeah.
people who are trying to do big things and impactful things with their companies, within their internal clients, with their teams. Um, they I think will bring that openness and that desire to be patient through this. So
Mhm. Yeah. So how do you think the pandemic has changed any of this dynamic? And I almost feel silly asking this question in some ways because, we're 5 years out from the pandemic or almost 5 years out. I don't think people are as afraid as they certainly were once, when this first started. Um, a lot of us thought we were all gonna die, particularly, people like me, a big, heavy person was told essentially by the media, get your affairs in order because you're probably not gonna see the end of this pandemic." and everybody was scared to death for a variety of reasons, and it was very bad for a lot of people. And we're in a different spot now. But the thing that has lingered is, I think a lot of people kind of got comfortable working from home or working from wherever they wanted to be. Um, and I don't know that that's the right recipe for a corporation, for example, where everybody really needs to be rowing in the same direction. Maybe at a law firm, you could get away with it to some extent because this partner represents this sector, this partner represents this sector, and they have people report to them. But where everybody is literally needs to be rowing in the same direction because the company sells, like in your most recent case, like battery technology, yard tools, tools for around the house, that sort of thing. I mean, everybody they need to know the same stuff. They need to know the industry. They need to be rowing in the same direction. Can that really be accomplished when people are not present?
Guess this is somewhat of a provocative question, as it should be. I mean, the way I answered it is basically, I think the extremes, be wary of the extremes. That's how I would say it. But
Mm,
I mean, collaboration again is to me key to everything. And I don't really think you can only be sitting at your home. I mean, again, unless you're doing commoditized work, which there are roles in certain
mm,
settings where it's commodity work, and that's okay. It's very transactional oriented. But I think you have to have some interaction. You have to have built that team connection in some way. So, I mean, video calls. I mean, I was known for sounding the trumpet of video calls during the pandemic for people who had work uncomfortable with using video. To me, you can do things that will start getting you closer to making it interpersonal. But in my last role, I did as much travel as I could because I was working with a global team. I needed to be in the same room. I needed to be breaking bread with these great colleagues, and I needed to be meeting with internal clients at different business units, because if you don't do that, you're just not going to build that trust, and not in the same room when you need to be, or off in the same corridor or in the same campus. So I think that's part of this. So I would definitely, I like hybrid. I mean, I like hybrid, or if someone is remote, where there is a very regular cadence of that person going and traveling to where the action is. But the
mm,
second thing, Gene, I'll say is, and I certainly learned this, it also is very sort of individual based. There are people who, let's say maybe more senior person like I am, where I came up working in the same buildings in great law firms, great companies. So I'm used to collaboration, and I and I'm self-starter and all these things, but in just my style, I think allows me to, when I need to be remote, but then with that combination of the personal travel. But I also have worked with some individuals where it's very clear that they for them to shine most brightly, to put it, I guess, one way, they have to be in the office a substantial amount of the time. Otherwise, they will be distracted, or they will not have. Maybe they haven't built the relationship. So I think perhaps people maybe who are more junior, um, or if they're working with certain kinds of internal clients, with like engineering teams, product
mhm,
development
mhm.
teams. I mean, you've got to have that synergy, and being at your home, I don't think works as well. So again, I would say I applaud like different enterprises that are looking at this so thoughtfully, but also the ones who are taking nuance and saying, well, every situation is not the same, and then tackling it that way. But I think it's a hard one right now, obviously, with trying to potentially roll back expectations, changes. But I like your question, because I think the extremes where people sort of say, well, I can do everything fine in my home. I just would say my guess would be in many, or even a majority of jobs, that's not going to really allow them to really shine for their clients, their companies. And that's ultimately, that's what we're here for, right? It's not about us. It's about the greater good of our company and the enterprise. And so I think just a thoughtful approach to this is what I embrace. But I've seen the good and the bad, and I think you've got to be careful. And that's where, again, going back to the feedback loop of watching and working closely with your people, you find out what works and what doesn't. And if it's not working, then you got to have hard questions and say, well, look, I don't think this is working. I need you to change. Let's do this on a pilot basis. Let's see what happens. But you can't just accept status quo if it's not delivering what your company and internal clients deserve.
Right. Yeah. I think there's another chapter or two to be written about
Yes.
all of this, and I think we're seeing Silicon Valley pushing the envelope. I mean, as you point out, like if you're in a manufacturing or engineering job or those types of things, you've been going to the office, you've been going to the warehouse, you've been going to the facility because you can't do your job from home. But a lot of professionals who work at a computer can convince themselves that they can do just the same job at home. And I think what we're starting to see with a bunch of the Silicon Valley companies is require people to be back in the office so many days a week. And now you're starting to hear companies saying, well, now it's got to be 5 days a week.
Right.
And I don't know that that's the right answer either. I think that probably where we're going to wind up settling is be in the office more often than not.
Yes.
And as the rule, be in the office. But then if you have a sick child, I would rather you be productive from home than take the day off
Right.
or have to take
Right.
half the day off. Or, if like a lot of the stuff that we do, if we wake up and we're congested or sneezing or coughing, we could still do a productive day, but stay home. Don't get your coworkers sick.
Mhm.
Be smart, as I think where we're going to wind up going with this. And I don't think that we're quite there yet,
Right.
but I think we'll get there. And I think, again, it goes back to the be thoughtful and also be a human being, be caring about the people who are in your coworkers and the people who work for you as well.
Yes.
So we'll see what winds up happening as we move forward through this. But I don't think we've seen the end of the questions and the trials and what's going to happen. And the other thing too, I also think we're starting to see this more and more. A lot of the young people had said, "Oh, I'll never take a job at a place that requires me to go into the office. If I can't work from home, I'm just not interested in the job." And now you're starting, I think, to see those folks have kids and they have dogs and they have commitments at home, and they realize, maybe going to the office isn't quite as bad of an idea as it once seemed.
Yeah, and kind of to build on that, I mean, again, looking at sort of as I look back to my many years in practice, you learn it was so invaluable. I mean, those many years going in and spending time being in the same space as all of
Hmm.
my colleagues, because again, it's like it's a society. I mean, it's just all these different people with expertise, with personalities. How do you fit into that? And all of that becomes part of you. You're what I again call the rootedness of how can you relate, be confident, have presence, solve
Hmm.
problems collaboratively, and how can you what's the proxy for that that I guess what worry the most about. I would say the newer generation, because there's subtlety and to navigate definitely the people dynamics, the business
Hmm.
dynamics, and to do that with presence. I mean, again, going back to the disc, I mean, many of us trend towards being introverted or not as extroverted as some people. How do you gain that confidence and that foundation unless you're in there and then realizing, oh, I can do this. Oh, this is good. I actually thrive on the problem solving, even though I may not be as sort of outspoken as some people. So you've got to have that people element, I think, at least foundationally, or it could maybe force you to plateau, or you may plateau in your career in certain ways. You won't have that evolving dynamic possibility or pathway because you didn't grow the whole person professional through that interactive process. And you weren't probably then achieving as much, even in those early days.
Yeah, and I do also, just to build on that, I don't know how you stand out, and maybe it's just a function of that's not the world I grew up in. When I first got my very first legal job right out of law school, I knew it was time to go home when all of the partners had left. So I was the last person in the building almost every day. And if I wasn't the last person in the building, it was because I was going to some one of the partners did planning and zoning stuff, and those meetings start at like 8 o'clock, and sometimes they don't get over until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Well, they don't go to those. The new associate goes to those, So if I wasn't the last person in the building, it was because I was at some meeting on behalf of some partner somewhere. And presence helps you stand out, and not just your yeah, you got to be good at what you do, or at least good enough. But if you're good enough and you're always there and working hard, a smart boss can find a role for you to not only
Yes, yeah,
contribute
yes,
but to thrive.
exactly.
And then you grow as a person, you grow as an attorney, and then you start to see things. And I do think that there's a sector of the working population that are going to have, just like the school age kids are going to have real challenges moving forward as they progress through elementary and high school. I think there's a section of the workforce that's going to have trouble moving through to the next level, pushing through to the managerial roles.
I think so, and I think the problem also is, again, the sort of fear, and many humans, path of least resistance often is kind of what they take. So that's what worries me, because it's almost, you dig in, and that's what I hear sometimes about sort of when they say, "Oh, we're going to move to back to a hybrid sort of framework," and then you hear some people who are clamoring against that, highly resistant, and it's surprising to me. But I think I realize that they don't get it. They don't see that, like, in their self interest, that value that could
Yeah.
come out of. But I understand it a lot. It's very complex, but I think where we're like-minded is we see the value in interpersonal interaction and what that can do.
Yeah, and I also think it is oftentimes it's when somebody's upsetting your situation, the initial reaction is to push back and say, "Woe is me. Why does it have to be that way? I
Right.
don't want it to be that way. It doesn't need to be that way." And looking back at my career, I've had situations where I don't know that I've ever been fired, but there's a way that bosses, if they want to get rid of you, they don't really like you, they can make it in your best interest to leave or not stick around. I've had a few of those types of situations, and both when I was trying to become a law professor, and then when I was at certain law firms. It wasn't work. It doesn't always work out, right? And at the moment when it doesn't work out, or either you're losing a contract, or you got fired, God forbid, that sort of thing. Um, the the world looks so dark. The sun is not shining, but in my experience, at those moments, that's always, you're standing at the beginning of a new chapter that is going to be far better than what it otherwise would have been, because it forces you to get out of your comfort zone.
Absolutely.
And I think doing that every so often is an important way for everybody to grow throughout their career.
Exactly.
So, well, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sorry we went longer than I told you we were going to
This
go,
is
but
great.
it's good talking to you. And before I do let you go, is there any last thoughts that you have, any words of wisdom that you have about, whether it be about the practice, about the interpersonal stuff we've talked about building a team? What do you want to leave the audience with today?
I think my bit of insight, or at least reflection from my, like, 24 years in practice, is that don't let your tactical subject matter expertise get the limelight and all the attention, and really be disciplined and recognize the value to be more holistic in what you do. And if you don't have as many of those sort of those strengths yourself, figure out how to collaborate, partner with people who do, but acknowledge those, and make sure you are checking off the other boxes that I think are so critical, the people boxes, the strategy boxes, and don't get lulled into sort of, well, it's working fine. The clients are happy because you've got a team, you need to sustain your operation. And it's not just about you, it's about who follows you. So just take that broad view, and also know that a lot of people, again, will be in that quadrant. So recognize you're going to have to take some remedial measures, and you're going to have to be sort of be very careful as you approach this, or you could fall into the path that many of the companies and many of the professionals fall into, which is, again, great tactics, and everything else is just an afterthought.
Yeah. Yeah, that's no way to well, you can survive doing that, but you're not gonna thrive.
You got it. Yes.
Yeah. All right, Carlo. Well, thank you so much. It's always good to
Yeah.
see you. I look
Thanks,
forward to
Gene.
seeing you soon.
Wonderful.